Welcome to our channel, where real true crime stories are told in a quiet, chilling, and haunting way. If you enjoy turning off the lights at night, sinking into an eerie atmosphere, and listening to unresolved mysteries, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now let the lights soften, let your body relax, and let your breathing slow down. Settle in, and sink into the stories that follow. Wishing you a peaceful night, and a good sleep. The puzzle that endured. Night had settled over the quiet stretches of Northern California in the late 1960s, a time when serenity reigned over most small towns, until an unexpected series of disturbing events shattered that calm. What began as a typical winter evening in December 1968 soon marked the onset of one of the most bewildering mysteries in modern American history. Teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen had chosen a quiet roadside spot to talk, away from the city lights, when a stranger approached their car. Whatever transpired after that moment would stay engraved as the beginning of a chilling sequence later, connected to a figure the world would come to know as Z. 2 months later, on the night of Independence Day in 1969, another young couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, left a gathering of friends and drove to a secluded area. Their conversation was interrupted when a car pulled up behind them, then drove away, leaving them momentarily confused. Minutes later, the same vehicle returned. A man stepped out, and what followed was swift, chaotic, and terrifying. Both Darlene and Michael were severely injured. Michael survived and later shared crucial details about the stranger who confronted them. A few months after that, a pair of college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, experienced something even more unsettling. While picnicking at Lake Berryessa, they noticed a figure approaching, a man wearing a hooded outfit with a strange symbol on his chest. He proceeded to restrain them and acted with a calculated cruelty before fleeing the scene. On the door of Brian's car, he left a symbol and handwritten notes referencing previous incidents. Brian survived and recounted the nightmarish encounter. Cecilia passed away in a hospital days later. In October 1969, in San Francisco's Presidio Heights, taxi driver Paul Stein ended what was supposed to be an ordinary work shift. A passenger climbed into his cab, and within minutes, Paul's fate was sealed. The stranger fled but left behind a disturbing calling card, a letter sent to a local newspaper accompanied by the same strange symbol, a circle crossed by perpendicular lines. The incidents formed a pattern that would haunt investigators for decades. What made these events even more unnerving was not just their violence, but the psychological game woven around them through a stream of letters mailed to newspapers. The first 3 letters were sent to prominent San Francisco publications, in which the writer identified himself as Z and demanded that his messages be printed on the front page. Each letter included a section of a coded cipher that he claimed would reveal his identity if decoded. The first cipher, known as the 408-character cipher, was solved within days by a schoolteacher and his wife in Salinas, California. Its contents shocked the public. The writer bragged about collecting servants for the afterlife, and stated that he would never reveal his name because it would thwart his plans. The decoded message offered a disturbing glimpse into the mindset behind the letters and fueled nationwide anxiety. A second, more complex cipher of 340 characters soon followed. For more than half a century, the 340 cipher remained unsolved, becoming one of the most infamous codes in criminal history. In 2020, 51 years later, a trio of amateur codebreakers announced a partial solution. Though it did not reveal the writer's name, it contained chilling taunts about his fearlessness and his continuing desire to challenge those pursuing him. Each letter sent by this figure started the same way. "This is Z speaking." The tone was both mocking and cold, with details that only the person responsible for the events would know. The letters often ended with cryptic symbols and new coded passages, as if the writer were designing an ongoing puzzle for police and citizens alike. Authorities attempted to piece together a portrait of the mysterious figure using survivor testimony and scant eyewitness accounts. A composite sketch was released, showing a stocky man with glasses and a calm demeanor. Yet every lead evaporated as quickly as it appeared. The enigmatic letters, instead of bringing clarity, deepened the sense of despair and confusion. The case became a tangle of symbols, hints, and contradictions. Over the decades, the list of possible suspects grew. Amateur investigators, journalists, and retired detectives proposed dozens of names. One of the most discussed individuals was Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher with several suspicious details in his background. Despite intense scrutiny, handwriting comparisons, and multiple interrogations, there was never enough evidence to link him conclusively to the case. He was eliminated from consideration after his death. Rumors and theories multiplied. Some claim Z might have continued his actions in other regions under different methods. Others argued that certain earlier or later events might also be connected, though never formally proven. Investigators pursued any fragment of evidence they could: faded fingerprints, saliva traces on envelopes, partial DNA fragments recovered from stamped glue, yet none offered a definitive lead. Modern forensic technology, while powerful, struggled against the fragile remnants of evidence gathered in the 1960s. The key challenge lay in the era itself. Crime investigation tools were rudimentary by today's standards. DNA profiling did not exist, surveillance cameras were rare, and record-keeping was fragmented. Witness memories were often inconsistent. Physical evidence degraded. Each attempt to reconstruct events felt like assembling a puzzle from pieces that had been scattered and weathered by time. Beyond the facts, the case left a lasting psychological imprint. The letters, neat, deliberate, and strangely artistic, portrayed someone who sought more than notoriety. It was as if the author wanted to be remembered as an architect of fear, an engineer of riddles, someone orchestrating a grand performance. Every symbol, every cipher, every taunt to the police seemed designed to prolong his presence in the public mind. Today, what remains is not only a sequence of violent events, but a larger narrative of mystery, obsession, and unanswered questions. Who is the man behind the cryptic symbols? What motivated his elaborate communications? Why did he choose those moments, those people, those locations? And perhaps most haunting of all, why has no one ever been able to determine his true identity? The mystery of Z persists as one of the most enduring unsolved cases of the 20th century, a puzzle whose final piece remains hidden, waiting for someone to uncover it. Shadows of Whitechapel. Night descended upon the narrow streets of Whitechapel, the poorest district in East London, where gas lamps flickered weakly against the damp air. Families crowded into shabby lodging houses, and the smell of coal smoke drifted from brick chimneys that had seen better days. It was the final summer of the 1880s, and the city was on the verge of confronting a series of events that would carve their place into its collective memory. In late August 1888, the ordinary rhythm of life for those struggling to survive in London's East End would be overturned. The footsteps echoing on wet cobblestones were no longer the only sounds that made residents shudder. Something else emerged from the darkness, a shadow that history would remember by a chilling name: Jack the Ripper. Marian Nichols, known to locals as Polly, became the first woman whose fate was tied to this name. Nichols walked the dimly lit streets of Whitechapel in the early hours of August 31st, searching for the few coins that might pay for a night's lodging. Around 3:40 a.m., a passerby noticed a motionless figure lying near a stable entrance. It was Polly, her face pale in the misty dawn, her eyes closed as though in quiet sleep despite the harsh cold of the morning. Police rushed to the scene and found deep wounds along her neck, as well as multiple slashes across her torso, marks unlike anything previously documented in London investigations. No one yet knew that this would be only the beginning of a string of harrowing incidents that would engulf the city. Less than a week later, on September 8th, another woman, Annie Chapman, was discovered. The scene was a short walk from where Polly had been found. Under the dim glow reflected from small puddles on the ground, Annie's body lay lifeless behind a house on Hanbury Street. Severe injuries on her neck and further mutilation of her lower body sent waves of shock through bystanders and officers alike. Like Nichols, Chapman struggled to survive in the district's unforgiving poverty, drifting through the narrow alleys in search of enough money to keep a roof over her head. The first witnesses, shaken, would later say that the brutality inflicted upon her was beyond anything they had imagined possible. With this second discovery, a deep and unsettling pattern began to take shape. At first, investigators hesitated to connect the two cases. London police viewed them as isolated tragedies, products of the district's hardship and crime-ridden environment. But the illusion of coincidence shattered at the end of September. On the night of September 30th, two women, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, went missing, and within 1 hour both would be found in conditions that heightened fear across the city. Elizabeth Stride was discovered in Dutfield's yard along Burner Street. Her neck had been cut, but her body lacked the additional injuries present in earlier cases. This suggested someone may have interrupted the attacker before more could be done. Several witnesses claimed to have seen Stride with a man that night, but their descriptions contradicted one another. Some said he was short, others tall. Some said he had a dark mustache, others insisted he was clean-shaven. The confusing accounts, combined with the dim lighting of the East End streets, left investigators without any reliable direction. Only 45 minutes later, a patrolman in Mitre Square stumbled upon the body of Catherine Eddowes. What he found was far worse. Eddowes lay on the cold stone pavement, her throat deeply cut, her face and abdomen extensively mutilated. Parts of her organs had been removed, and the precise incisions led observers to suspect that the attacker possessed at least some anatomical knowledge, perhaps from work in a slaughterhouse or as an assistant to a butcher, though these were only educated guesses. The level of damage caused officers to recoil, even those accustomed to the uglier side of city life. The public soon referred to these two crimes as the double event, a phrase used by newspapers that quickly ignited widespread panic. Letters began arriving at newspaper offices and police stations, allegedly written by the attacker himself, mocking their inability to stop him. One notorious letter, signed Jack the Ripper, became the source of the name that would forever be linked to the case, though many modern historians believe it may have been a hoax written by a sensationalist journalist. Even so, these letters overwhelmed law enforcement with false leads, distractions, and public hysteria. Instead of helping the investigation, they clouded it with misinformation. Late Victorian Whitechapel was a labyrinth of danger. Overcrowded lodging houses, unlit back streets, and alleys so narrow that two people could barely pass made it an ideal environment for someone wishing to move unseen. The police force lacked modern forensic tools. No fingerprint database, no DNA analysis, no standardized crime scene photography. Investigators relied almost entirely on witness statements, many of which were unreliable, and intuition. High-ranking officers debated endlessly whether the attacker was a local resident, a foreign laborer, a medical student, or someone suffering from severe psychological disturbance. With no definitive evidence, each theory was as fragile as the next. The final victim connected to the case was Mary Jane Kelly, found on the morning of November 9th in her small rented room at Miller's Court. Unlike the earlier victims, Kelly was discovered indoors, which meant the attacker had significantly more time to commit the crime without fear of interruption. The scene inside that tiny room was catastrophic, far worse than anything seen before. The extent of the damage indicated prolonged activity, suggesting the attacker had entered a deeply disturbed state, driven by impulses that escalated far beyond the earlier incidents. This was the grim crescendo of a series of horrors that had already shaken the public to its core. Newspapers seized upon the events. Headlines screamed of a monster haunting the East End. Londoners bought morning papers in record numbers, eager and terrified to read of the latest developments. Public anxiety soared. Rumors circulated wildly. Some blamed immigrants, others pointed to local tradesmen. The list of potential suspects would eventually grow to more than 100, spanning occupations from barbers to doctors to laborers. Among them were individuals Scotland Yard had quietly compiled into internal reports, yet none would ever be charged or brought to trial. Each potential answer collapsed under scrutiny, leaving the case mired in uncertainty. Why was Jack the Ripper never identified? The answer lies in a web of limitations unique to that era. Technology was primitive. Investigators had no ability to analyze biological traces, nor could they determine whether two cases were connected through laboratory evidence. Crime scenes lacked systematic documentation. Officers often washed away blood or cleaned the surroundings before details could be recorded, simply because such protocols did not exist at the time. Witness testimony was inconsistent. The attacker struck in the dead of night under inadequate lighting. Most witnesses were passers-by, night laborers, or residents who had consumed alcohol, leaving their recollections questionable. Every time a promising description emerged, it clashed with three other contradictory ones. Whitechapel's geography made the situation even worse. It was an overcrowded immigrant community. Dozens of languages were spoken, and police struggled to communicate effectively with residents. Mistrust of authority was widespread, causing many people to withhold potentially vital information. False leads multiplied. Street rumors were mistaken for evidence. Valuable clues may have slipped away unnoticed in the chaos. Various volunteer groups attempted to aid the investigation, including the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. These groups patrolled the streets with lanterns and attempted to gather information, but their efforts sometimes interfered with police work. The attacker might have retreated deeper into the maze-like alleys with ease, disappearing between lodging houses and workshops before anyone could grasp what had happened. Dozens of theories emerged over the years. Some argued that the attacker was a foreigner who fled the country soon after the last incident. Others believed he might have been institutionalized for unrelated psychiatric reasons, or that he died unexpectedly during the winter of 1888. The possibilities were endless, yet none were supported by conclusive proof. In more recent decades, one recurring suspect has been Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who lived in the area and was known to suffer from severe mental illness. A modern DNA analysis on a shawl purportedly found near Catherine Eddowes' body was claimed to match descendants of Kosminski's family. But the shawl's provenance is disputed, the testing methods questioned, and experts warn that contamination over 130 years makes any conclusive result impossible. Thus, even modern science has failed to close the case. Today, Jack the Ripper remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history. The events of 1888 have inspired films, books, research papers, and entire industries revolving around guided tours of the old Whitechapel streets. Yet beneath the myth lies the tragedy of real women whose lives were cut short. Marion Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Their stories reflect the harsh reality of poverty, neglect, and vulnerability in Victorian London. They were not symbols or characters. They were people navigating a brutal environment where danger lurked in every shadow. Walk the streets of Whitechapel today, and you will find renovated buildings, cafes, and bright streetlights. But among the modern structures, remnants of narrow alleys and old brick walls still stand, whispering echoes of 1888. The story endures because it is unsolved, because the attacker vanished as though swallowed by the night, and because society still seeks answers to questions left hanging for over a century. The legend of Jack the Ripper is not simply a tale of violence. It is a story about fear, the limitations of early criminal investigation, the power of media, and the human desire to uncover truth in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. It reminds us that beneath the myth lies a deeper narrative, one of loss, mystery, and the haunting silence of an investigation that reached for answers but found only shadows. Tracing a fading shadow. The story begins in a quiet coastal town in southern Portugal, where sunlight settles over long stretches of sand and tourists drift in and out of seaside resorts. It was May 2007 when a family from the United Kingdom arrived there with a group of friends for a holiday. Inside a small apartment in the resort, a 3-year-old girl slept beside her 2 younger siblings. Her parents and their friends went out for dinner just a short walk away, a common routine during vacations. But only a few hours later, when the mother returned to check on the children, she froze. Her daughter was no longer in bed. The window and door were open, yet no one had heard anything unusual. From that moment onward, a simple family trip shifted into one of the most haunting disappearance cases in modern history. In the days that followed, hundreds of people joined the search. Local police, neighbors, tourists, and volunteers called the little girl's name across every corner of the town. But all traces of her vanished as quickly as they were noticed. Realizing the scale of public attention, the family created a dedicated fund to keep the spotlight on the case and gather global support. Media coverage surged, intensified by debates and criticism of how local investigators handled the early stages of the investigation. Initially, Portuguese authorities questioned people in and around the area, including tourists and resort employees. Several persons of interest emerged, yet every lead dissolved before it produced any tangible result. Inconsistencies and procedural gaps at the scene raised doubts, and parts of the public accused investigators of missing crucial early opportunities. At one point, local authorities even redirected their attention toward the family, creating further turmoil instead of generating new evidence. These missteps were widely condemned by experts and international press. By the late 2000s, the original investigation was suspended due to a lack of conclusive proof. However, the case never faded from public consciousness. In 2011, British authorities launched a new large-scale review known as Operation Grange, deploying detectives and specialists to reassess all documents, witness accounts, and physical evidence. They worked closely with Portuguese investigators to re-examine leads that may have been overlooked. Over the following years, new details surfaced slowly, such as a composite sketch based on a witness who saw an unfamiliar man carrying a child near the apartment, and scattered reports from people who believed they had seen unusual figures near the coastline. Each piece of information was collected, analyzed, then eventually set aside or left unresolved. In 2020, attention shifted to a significant new figure, a German national with a long history of criminal behavior who had lived in the Algarve region at the time of the disappearance. Prosecutors in Germany identified him as the main suspect. Authorities began examining his movements, communications, and past activities. Investigators conducted extensive searches around remote locations, including areas near a reservoir, hoping to uncover clues that might clarify his involvement. In the following years, German police and international partners continued scrutinizing phone records, soil samples, and witness testimonies related to the suspect. They used modern techniques, drones to scan remote land, trained dogs to detect traces, and comparative analysis tools to reconstruct the timeline. Yet despite years of work, no definitive legal conclusion has been reached. Meanwhile, complicated external factors continued to arise. At one point, a woman from another country claimed she was the missing girl, requesting DNA tests. Her claims were later disproven, and she was found to have caused unnecessary chaos. Situations like these added emotional strain to an already difficult case and highlighted how deeply the public remained invested. Almost 2 decades after that night in the small Portuguese resort, the case remains among the world's most persistent mysteries. Investigators continue analyzing data, reviewing evidence, and waiting for a breakthrough that might narrow the search. The family has never lost hope that the truth will eventually emerge, even as the full picture remains obscured by unanswered questions.